In today's session, we're going to finish what we talked about in the previous session. I mentioned two main points on the study of religion and public education. Point one was the legality or the constitutionality of religion in a public educational setting. And that's our previous lecture. And so now in this session, we'll talk about Roman numeral II, the relevance of studying religion as part of public education. And one of the things I want to talk about for a minute here is why I choose the word relevance over importance. And again, I always ask students, what's the difference between something being relevant and something being important? And basically it's that there's a lot of things that are important. I mean, it's important what's going on in some tribe in South Africa today. That's important. Is it relevant to me or to your life? Well, maybe, but probably not by and large. It doesn't really have anything to do with. And so what this lecture is about is that studying religion isn't just an important thing, but it's a relevant thing. And generally, to fill up the rest of the chalkboard when I talk with students, I say why. I mean, why might it be useful to you to take some time to study religion as part of your preparation for your career? And actually, they get thinking about it and talking about it, and we get a pretty good list on the board. I'm going to talk about 4 areas of importance that generally most of the reasons that students list would fit under one of these 3 or 4 areas. So let's talk about those. So this will have, I guess, A, B, C, and D as far as in your outline for today. First of all, it's relevant to study religion in public educational setting because it helps us to understand world cultures and world events. To find a culture that has not been informed by religion, by spirituality, by spiritual perspective would be nearly impossible. Every culture is informed by religion, even in cultures that would consider themselves post-religious in some way. Like often a lot of Europe is considered post-Christian, that Christianity had an influence, but it doesn't have much of an influence today. But the influence is still there. I mean, you go to Europe and you want to tour architecture in Europe, what are you going to tour? Cathedrals. When you're in Western Europe or you're in Eastern Europe, are there different types of cathedrals you tour? Sure. It tends to be Catholic cathedrals in Western Europe, Orthodox in Eastern Europe. And so you see that religion has to do with the culture, but also has to do with a lot of things that go on in the culture. One of the examples, also generally ask students, because more and more students have traveled to other cultures, I have them talk about things that they've seen in other cultures, either architecture, practices, beliefs, seemingly more like moral codes, mores in a culture, that they thought were informed by religions of that culture. I'll have students that have been in the military and they've served in places like Saudi Arabia, for instance. And there's restrictions there because of the religion of that culture on what women can do, on what kinds of things can get through customs into that country because of the influence of religion. I usually give the example of the country of Haiti. When you think of Haiti, the official religion of Haiti is Catholicism. And when we get talking more about specific religions and religious belief systems, I'll talk more about the role of Catholicism in Haiti. But probably the most common spiritual worldview in Haiti is voodoo. And what you find in Haiti is really a link between, an interesting, unique link between Catholicism and voodoo. And again, we'll talk about that more later. But to understand some things, particularly about Haitian voodoo spirituality, give some understanding of some things that go on in that culture. It helps to understand the culture better. Let me just give one example for now. Haiti is a poor country. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The average income in Haiti is less than $300 a year. So if you have a job making $1 a day in Haiti, that's a good middle-class average job. Now, everything in Haiti costs more than here in the United States. So thus, we have the poverty that there is in Haiti. But it's a very poor country. And so because of that, there's a lot of beggars in Haiti. Old people, kids, It's hard to go anywhere and not be confronted by beggars, especially if you go in as an American or European. Well, if you were walking down the street in Haiti and you saw somebody begging and kind of tugged at you, that, well, you know, I got some money in my pocket, I'm not going to notice it being gone, but for them, that's a day's wages, you know. And so you reach in your pocket and you start to give this money to this Haitian beggar. And then you think, oh, everybody in Haiti has AIDS, so I don't want to touch this beggar, which there is AIDS in Haiti, but it's not that predominant. But we think that. And so you put the money on the ground in front of the guy, or the child, or the woman. There's a good possibility that if you came back the next day, that money would still be there on the ground. Well, coming in uninformed about the spiritual belief system of that country, only operating out of my own ethnocentric, American, capitalistic, Protestant work ethic worldview, what would I assume? Well, no wonder they're poor. They won't even pick money up off the ground that's sitting in front of them. But one belief within the Haitian voodoo belief system is that if something of value hits the ground, that it becomes open space for evil spirits to inhabit. Okay, I'm already a beggar. I'm already poor. Do I want to potentially put a bunch of evil spirits in my pocket and take them home with me? No, probably not. I have a friend that's lived and taught in Haiti for over 20 years now. And I've heard her tell stories about walking down the street and picking up some money on the street and little kids running away from her screaming. Because that's an ingrained part of their worldview. And they do that because of this religious worldview. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they don't have any sort of work ethic about them. It's because they have a spiritual belief that says, life's bad enough. The last thing I want to do is put a bunch of evil spirits in my pocket and take them home. Let me give you one other example. Back 8 or 10 years ago now, I spent some time one summer in East Africa. And we spent a few days on an island called Zanzibar. Well, Zanzibar's, I think, like 96% Muslim. So there's a whole lot that goes on the island of Zanzibar that's religiously influenced by Islam. When I checked into the guest house where I was staying and I opened the closet, there was written in English, and I think there was also maybe a French and maybe German translation of it. But there was a piece of paper hanging inside the closet door that gave instructions on how women are suggested to dress in that country. Now, if I were just an ethnocentric, it's all about me, American, I'd go, well, tough, I'm an American and I don't dress like that. I didn't even bring those kind of clothes. Forget that. But to have some respect for that culture, you'd probably want to try to adhere to that as much as you could. Throughout the day, Muslims have 5 appointed times of prayer every day. Well, in Zanzibar, in the city there, during the middle of the day, you could try to go to a restaurant or go to a shop, and potentially it was closed because it was a time of prayer. And when those times of prayers were announced, everything shut down for half an hour or so during that part of the day. The first morning we were there, I was sharing a room in this guest house with an aunt of mine and a friend of mine, and right before sunrise, still dark, these sirens start going off. And you could hear somebody in the streets yelling in a foreign language. Well, you know, if you're not aware that you're in a Muslim area and that at these appointed times of prayer, sirens go off and there are people called muezzins who call people to prayer, you would think, well, we're being attacked or something, and people are yelling in the streets. But it was a morning call to prayer. Actually, one of the friends that was with us, she did kind of fall out of bed, panic that first morning when all that started. There's a lot to understanding a culture if you can understand the religion of that culture. You didn't see paintings on Zanzibar because in Islam, you can't paint images of people or of animals. There was a lot of beautiful geometric design, in the artwork there in Zanzibar. But no painted images of any people or any animals, no paintings to speak of. You couldn't find pork chops. Couldn't find alcohol in the public places. I'm sure that if you wanted to find alcohol, somebody was probably selling it there because of the tourism. But at least at the time I was there, those were things you couldn't find because of the influence of the Islamic belief system on that culture. Every culture, to try to understand it and to communicate and function with that culture, and especially in the global society that we live in, where we're forced to collaborate with other cultures, it's important to understand the beliefs of those cultures. Along with that, under this first reason, not only does studying religion help us understand world cultures, but it helps us to understand world events. Again, there's not a lot of world events that don't have some way that religion is influencing that event, or that event is having influence on religion. Generally, I have students make a list again on the board. What are places, even if you don't understand all the implications of it and what's going on, what are places in the world today that you know that religion has something to do with what's going on in that place? And they'll list, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Sudan, Northern Ireland. I mean, you can go on and on listing all these places where religion is having some sort of influence or being influenced by that current event, what's going on there. I don't want to take time to talk about all those for our class here and our class's purposes, but I do want to mention a couple that are probably strongly influential on our culture today and on current political situations today. One of those that's pretty pivotal to a lot of situations is the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I'm not going to claim to fully understand that issue because I don't, and I'm not going to claim to know any solution to that issue, but let me just tell you some of the dynamics of that. And the thing is, that situation is a core from which other situations today ripple out from for us. So this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Israelis are predominantly what religion? Jewish. And the Palestinians are predominantly Muslim. So why are they fighting? Well, you can look at that in a lot of regards, but to look at it historically, you could say that the fighting that we are most aware of today there really started in the late 1940s. But I think there are those who would say that understand the religious history, that the issues, the typical mutual disregard for one another of those two groups goes back much further. Maybe even back 4,000 years ago. Both Muslims and Jews trace their ancient history back to the same person, Abraham. 4,000 years ago was about probably that era of time. And what both those religions teach is that Abraham is the father of their religions. Same father. So why aren't they getting along? Well, kind of the story that goes with that is that Abraham and God, and both religions say this, Abraham and God struck a deal with each other. They made a covenant with each other. And this covenant was that God would give Abraham many descendants, and that those descendants would be a holy nation, a sacred nation, a special nation, and that they would also inhabit a holy land, a sacred land, a special land. Well, over time, Abraham got to be like 100 years old, and he didn't have any children, which would seem to be problematic if he's going to have all these descendants. As a matter of fact, God said, according to the Jewish and Islamic story, look at all the stars in the sky. That's how many descendants you'll have. He's 100 years old, no kids. So what happened at that point was his wife, Sarah, did really what any responsible wife would do in that culture. She invited another woman to come in to bear children for the household. And again, that was pretty common in that culture. Women, the wife oversaw the childbearing of a household. And if a home did not have enough children to sustain the inheritance of the father, to take care of the mother and father as they grew older, then the wife would invite other women to come in and bear children for the household. So Sarah did the responsible thing. So she invited one of her slave girls, Hagar, to come and to have intercourse with Abraham. The result was they had a child. Well, and they named that son Ishmael. Well, over time, Sarah also ended up getting pregnant. And so she had a son, Isaac. And so you've got this household where you've got Abraham and his wife Sarah and her son Isaac, and you've got Abraham and the slave girl Hagar and her son Ishmael. Ishmael and Isaac, both children of Abraham. Abraham said that himself in the book of Genesis, that both were his sons. So the inheritance issue is, so when Abraham dies, does the oldest son, does the first son get the inheritance, which would be Ishmael, or does the son of the wife get the inheritance, which would be Isaac? Well, Jews trace their ancestry back to Isaac, and Christians also kind of align themselves with that ancestry. And so Jews and Christians say, well, the inheritance of the land, the inheritance of the promise, the inheritance of the covenant from God goes to the son of the wife, Isaac. Muslims who trace their ancestry back to Ishmael say the inheritance of the land, of the covenant, of the promise, goes to the first son, who would be Ishmael. And so from even when they were little boys, Sarah and Hagar had a major argument where Sarah basically kicked Hagar out over which of those boys should inherit Abraham's wealth. Well, that's still kind of the deal today. Should it be the Jews or should it be the Muslims who inherit this possession of this land? Now, this land that they both believe they have a rightful, God-ordained inheritance to is not a big land. I mean, it's often called a country, but it's not a country the size of the United States. It's not a country the size of Texas. As a matter of fact, it's a country the size of the state of Rhode Island. It's a country that probably is not even quite half the size of the state of Missouri. So we're talking about a very small area that both of these groups believe they have rightful inheritance to, rightful possession of. And that's kind of always been the case. But in the 1940s, what happened was that up to the 1940s, primarily the Palestinians lived in that land. The Jews had not lived in this land that the Jews called Israel since the first century. In the first century, the Jews were living in Israel, in control of Jerusalem, but then the Roman army came in, destroyed Jerusalem, killed a bunch of the Jews, ran the rest of them off. And so really, since late in the first century, Jews had not occupied this land. They'd been scattered throughout the world. But the Palestinians had occupied the land. Well, after World War II happened, and the extent of the Holocaust of World War II became known, the United Nations, primarily led by the United States and Great Britain, decided that some compensation needed to be made to the Jews of the world for this. And one part of that compensation was that Jews could go back to this land that they had not been able to go back to for now almost 2,000 years. So you've got Jews getting passports and visas and going back to this land that fits within the state of Missouri that's already occupied by people that have been living there for hundreds of years, the Palestinians. And the Jews say, we're back, this is our land, and the Palestinians say, what do you mean it's your land? The Jews say, well, God gave it to us and the United Nations gave it to us, so we're back for this. And the Palestinians say, well, no, God gave it to us, and we've been living here for hundreds of years, so we're not leaving. That was in 1948. And really, since 1948, there's been constant battles over that land. Even though in 1948, the State of Israel was officially recognized, boundaries were established by the U.S. and Great Britain, but for the Palestinians and the Israelis, those boundaries have constantly changed, even up into the recent future. through fighting, through military maneuvers over who gets what part of the land. Religion has a strong influence over that. I mean, even back when Clinton was president, he worked to try to bring some peace there between these two groups. And at one of the meetings where he was meeting with the Palestinian Israeli leader for days, and it seemed like they were coming to some agreement on how to divide this up and have two states and make this thing work. But then they came to talking about the city of Jerusalem and to particular areas in the city of Jerusalem that both religions consider sacred. And they couldn't come to agreement, and they ditched everything and went home because of the significance of these sacred sites in Jerusalem. Religion has a powerful influence over what's going on there. Now, from that, when the U.S. was attacked by Al-Qaeda in 2001, what's one of the main reasons that Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden gave for their attack of the United States? Well, it was our constant support of Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian issue. It rippled out there. And you can see lots of situations where what's going on as far as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is rippling out into other situations with Iraq, with Iran, with Al-Qaeda, that it ripples out. Now, let me go ahead and talk just a minute about Iraq, because that's another place where we're hearing about religious dissension today. And interestingly, within Iraq, even though there is a Christian dimension that's there, that's influencing that, most of the dissension in Iraq is actually between two Islamic sects, the Sunnis and the Shiites. Both Muslim, but fighting against one another in Iraq over really power and control. When Saddam Hussein was in charge, Saddam was a secular Sunni. And so he tended to give power to the Sunnis in his government. And he also tended to restrict any movement, control, power of the Shiites. So Sunnis had power, Shiites didn't. As a matter of fact, Shiites were often oppressed under Hussein's government. Well, so we go in, we topple Hussein's government, and we begin the move toward trying to set up a democratically elected government in Iraq. The majority of Iraqis are Shiites, not Sunnis. Sunnis are a minority, which on a worldwide scale, it's the other way around. But in Iraq, the Shiites are the majority. And so in trying to set up a democratically elected government, potentially the Shiites would be who would have more control in that government because they far outnumber the Sunnis in Iraq. So part of that is over control. Sunnis trying to keep control that they've had historically, Shiites trying to gain control that they did not have under Hussein. The other part of it that plays in, which begins to be our Western interest, is that many Shiites would assert that the Constitution of Iraq should reflect Islamic law. Most places in the world, that tends to be one of the thrusts of Shia Islam, is that secular law and religious law are maybe one and the same, or at least highly influence one another. Sunnis, on the other hand, even though they adhere to Islamic law personally, by and large believe that secular law and religious law can be separate. And so you also have debate over what should constitutional law look like in Iraq. Shiites have different ideas about that than Sunnis do. As Americans, we probably have a preference over which of those would be given power in governmental law. And so religion is influencing the power there, the potential of the governmental structure, the potential of the constitutional structure. It has great influence in Iraq. So first of all, to understand religion gives us a better handle on understanding cultures and understanding world events. And even though we haven't talked about every culture in the world, and we haven't talked about every current event in the world, to begin to understand that it does have influence enables us that if we are going to interact with other cultures, that we might give some thought to what value systems and belief systems influence this culture that I need to learn about, that I need to inform myself of, that I need to try to respect if I'm going to work in collaboration with someone from this culture. So hopefully it creates an awareness for that and a willingness to try to understand that. A second reason the study of religion is relevant for us in a public educational setting is it helps us to understand and communicate with other people better. I have a sister that, she's a school counselor now, but she was in the classroom for some years. And she was just in small schools here in southern Missouri. Just about every year, she would have a student in her classroom who was not, whose family had a belief system that was not kind of the mainstream conservative Christian belief system that we tend to think of that there is here in the Ozarks. And so she wanted to try to understand the belief systems of that family so that she could respect what was needed for that child, what was needed for that family, the kinds of things they did in the classroom at holidays. To understand religion enabled her to communicate better and serve better a child and a family that was represented in her classroom. Because of the global society that we live in, few of us will work in any careers where we do not interact with another culture. It will happen. I mean, even back many years ago when I was an undergrad at the University of Missouri, when we weren't so aware of the pluralism and how diverse our culture was, you know, I had lab partners from other countries, from other cultures, from other belief systems, that when I'd have them over and I'd fix a meal and then we'd study or prepare for a lab or whatever, I had to learn to take into consideration what kinds of foods they ate, ways foods were prepared. Well, I never thought about that coming from Pleasant Hill, Illinois, where everybody was the same belief system, all 1,000 people that lived there. But we live in a global culture. We have to be willing, if we're going to communicate with people in our careers, in the businesses that we work in, we've got to be willing to try to understand these other cultures. If you work for a business here in the Ozarks, and your boss comes to you on Thursday and says, got a client coming in from Saudi Arabia this weekend, you're hosting them for the weekend, when they leave on Monday, have the contract. And that's all they tell you. And you're like, well, I'm going to show them a good old Ozarks hometown time, just like I do any client coming in. We'll have a barbecue at my house, we'll put some pork chops on the grill, we'll get Coors to send us some of their best brew, we'll just have a good Ozarks time together. Are you going to have the contract when the weekend's over with the information that you've been given about that client? Potentially not. To understand some things about when someone comes from Saudi Arabia, what's possible and likely as far as their religious belief system, and so what values they may hold, that's important to know in order to function, collaborate with them in a business setting. Helps us to communicate with other people better. Let me give you one more example of that. At the end of the semester in my live classes, I usually have students write a paper where they talk about basically what they learned in this class. And a few years ago, I had a student that in his essay, he said, you know, I've lived on the same hall, the same residence hall for a couple years now. And there's another student from another country that I thought had a different belief system than mine that's lived on this same hall that I have. And I've never talked to him. Don't make eye contact with them because I realized I was afraid that I would offend them, I didn't understand them, so I just didn't talk to him. But he said, as I began to understand his belief system, his culture, in taking this class, I found myself making eye contact with him. I found myself stopping and talking to him in the hall. And now I found out he's really a great guy. Well, to understand something takes away the fear of it. I mean, when I hear a noise in the dark at my house, there's fear initially. But once I understand what caused the noise, usually fear is erased. Understanding something takes away the fear of that. And that's true with understanding religious belief systems, that it takes away the fear of not just the belief system, but the people that may adhere to that belief system. Third, to study other religious worldviews and other philosophies of religion helps us to clarify our own value system. I'm not here to tell you what value system to hold. I'm not here to push a particular value system on you. I'm not here to condemn any particular value system. But through taking a course like this, you have the opportunity to clarify what your value system is. Maybe you've decided there's some things I do not believe in reincarnation. Well, why not? At this point, for some of you, you may not really know why, except somebody told you you shouldn't, somebody's told you it's wrong. But as we study Hinduism and we talk about reincarnation, there's some parts of that that might make a little bit of sense. And so it forces you to think, so why don't I agree with that? Why don't I buy into that? And if you think through that, you've just clarified your own value system better. You still might not agree with reincarnation, but at least now you don't agree in an informed way. Or you might decide you do agree with it. But as we talk about different things in this class, it gives you an opportunity to clarify what you believe. Students who come in and say, I already know what I believe, and I don't really need to know what anybody else believes, I always think maybe you're a little threatened by their other belief systems. But if you can clarify and solidify your own belief system laid alongside other belief systems, that's a good thing in maturing and becoming the person that you want to be instead of the person that people tell you should be. Finally, studying religion helps us to develop skills that really can be used in any career and vocation. Religion is a humanities course. It helps us to understand what it means to be human a little better. What it means for me to be human, what it means for you to be human, what it means for those people I haven't even met yet to be human. And so whatever field we go into, some of us may say, I'm going to go in a field where I don't have to deal with people at all. It's not going to happen. Even those of you who are going into the most technical of fields, you'll have to deal with people because people use your technology that you're developing. And there will be an interaction with that. And so to have more of an insight, more of an appreciation for, and more of an understanding for where people might be coming from in life, that helps us to work better with people in any career, in any vocation, because of the global society we live in. I always think about my great-grandmother. She died about 10 years ago. She was 103. Her mind was probably sharper than mine is today at the end of her life. Her body just gave out. But, you know, she never really interacted with any other culture. Whatever other cultures she interacted with, it was friends of mine that I brought home from college or something. She lived in a pretty homogeneous, stable, same sort of culture. Everybody believed the same things. Everybody held the same values. So to understand some things about Islam, to understand some things about spiritist religions, to understand some things about even other types of Christianity. I mean, in the county I grew up in, there wasn't a Catholic in our county. I mean, it was that homogeneous. So she didn't have as much of a need to understand other cultures and other people with other belief systems. But it's a different world now than the one my great-grandmother lived in. Every day, we all interact with other cultures, face-to-face, online. We interact with other cultures. And so understanding some things about other belief systems enables us to better communicate, to better build relationships, and hopefully to better create a more civil society as we understand one another better.